but you were saying his something about his intelligence.
Oh yeah, it's a point that you touched on, which is, so I was saying that yes, my take on it would mostly be a character study, looking at his disturbed behavior, and basically, yeah, the fact that he's a lunatic, he's crazy, all that stuff. There would then be a substantial element to be focused on his physicality and his martial arts abilities.
Mm-hmm.
I would have the detective element in there quite strongly. And this is what I was saying before, cut me off. I wouldn't go as far as having him be the actual world's best detective, because he may not have all the day-to-day and years of experience that actual detectives have. But the fact that he's able to operate outside the law and do what he wants without having to obtain, court orders and things like that is a massive benefit to him. So that would be a huge element. And then
It also, to your point, if he was the world's greatest detective, it depends what you want to do with Gordon, because Gordon is an actual detective, and you can make it that Batman's a better detective than Gordon, and so he needs to depend on him because he's a good detective, but also because, like you said, he's outside the law. Or if the take is to make Gordon actually a better detective than Batman, but it depends on the preference.
Yeah, I think to try and keep it realistic, I would have Gordon be a better detective, because that's his job, essentially. But because Batman can operate outside the law, he is very useful to him in that way. Although the official, stance of the Gotham PD should be that Batman is a criminal. And, there would be no bat signal in my version, right?
At all, no signal.
At most, there would be a way where, maybe Gordon can get his attention.
A plain spotlight.
There would be something, but like I said, they wouldn't even interact that much, so it's probably not even needed. But the other thing I was going to get into, which you mentioned, is Batman's also meant to be a genius, right, in terms of his intellect. Now, I would, that didn't come across at all in, I don't think either Burton's movies or Nolan's, definitely not Schumacher's. I think you could do it in a way where he's one of these people who's just naturally quite intelligent. So, for example, when it comes to modifying his car and things like that, he doesn't need to have loads and loads of experience with it. He's like a quick learner, right? So he can do his research and understand what he's meant to do and basically just do it. And it would be elements like that in my version that show how smart he is, as well as obviously his detective work and piecing things together. But yeah, I am looking forward to the Batman. It's weird how it's taken them this long to title a Batman film like that.
To call it just the Batman.
The Batman, yeah. Yeah, I actually thought that Nolan would have done that with the third entry to his trilogy, because you have this idea, right? Batman Begins, and then it's The Dark Knight, and it's meant to be a bit more adult and whatever. And then he's fully formed. He is the Batman,
Right. But it's interesting, like the title being called the Batman, right? A lot of people say, why not just call it Batman or give it some other variation? But if you think about it, right, if it makes it more like if you were a criminal, right, would you say Batman or would you say the Batman?
Yeah, you'd call him the Batman, and that
you would say the Batman.
Yeah, in my version, my take, that's what he would be known as. People would call him the Batman.
Yeah, it's almost more familiar and it's less like imposing, less of what the criminal element would call him. It's very interesting to see how capable Pattinson will be, because we talk about the detective work, him being involved in the car, the genius aspect. Is he a genius? Is he not a genius? Where along the line of intelligence does he lie? How capable is he? The one other interesting element is, and I can't stop focusing on this because I think it's important, is that Andy Serkis, visually, the way he looks, the impression I get is when you look at his face, right? I think this is going to be one of the most smarky and sarcastic Alfreds we've ever seen, similar to the animated series, in the sense of this looks like a guy that's going to, like, visually, if you look at Michael Caine, he looks like an older gentleman, right? Yeah. If you look at Michael Doe, or whatever his name was, from Batman Forever, and before Michael Caine, similar thing. But when you look at Andy Serkis's face, when I look at his face, I think to myself, like, this is the face of someone that's sarcastic, a smart aleck, smarky, smarmy, smug. Like, he has the face of someone that would be that way, right? And that could be very interesting with Pattinson, like to have that type of dynamic with Pattinson.
Yeah, I agree. He does look like that. But at the same time, I've seen performances from him in like smaller independent British films where he is serious all the way through, to the point where you would, even with that face, you would never expect any type of humor from this guy. So, because he's a very talented actor, right? He's not just like a one-note guy. He can do what you want. So it really depends what the script and the director calls for. I can see what you're talking about, but I can also see it going the other way. It is interesting, though, how, you've mentioned he, like, if you just took, a picture of him and Pattinson and said to people, these two have been cast in a new Batman movie, I think my mind would say Serkis is Batman and Pattinson is Robin. Right?
Yeah, it does look that way, yeah.
Which is weird, because in Titans, the TV show, I don't know if you saw it, they cast Ian Glenn as Bruce Wayne, and he looks like Alfred. Even the way it's played is like Alfred. Like, you don't buy him as Batman. So yeah, I mean, like I said, it's the one kind of big movie that I'm intrigued by, even though I'm not, a particularly big fan of the director. Because usually for me, it's who's directing that excites me. But just as an overall package, this has got me interested and hooked me, and especially once they release those photos, and it's more along the lines of what I want to see anyway. So yeah, there's also this idea that it could be set in the Joker universe, and Warner Brothers is open to this because of how successful that movie was. I personally don't like that idea. Like, look, like I said, I would love to see a Batman set in that universe, because that's my Batman would work.
Well, here's the thing, and you know this, that most of the time this is the case. Producers, for most producers, money is what communicates to them. So Is there any possibility that the Joker coming out, costing as much as it did, making as much money as it did, being as well received as it was, do you think that wouldn't affect what they're doing with Batman from a producer standpoint? Or do you say for sure they're going to say something, or they're gonna adjust it somehow? Like, is there any real world situation where they don't say anything at all? It doesn't affect it at all, being that it made as much money as it made.
They've definitely minimum had the discussion. They have to have done, because you're right in what you're saying. Ultimately, that's what they're looking at, right? The finances. And Joker was always designed to be a one-off standalone film.
Mm-hmm.
I do think you could build a character-based series out of it, and I think I've mentioned this in the past, where I would do my character study Batman film as a loose sequel. It's set in that universe, but obviously it's focused on a different character. And then I wouldn't do Batman again. I would focus on maybe Gordon, or someone else. But that's too like art house, I think, for Warner Brothers. I think basically it's come down to a conversation of, we're either going to make a Joker sequel.
So you would do each film as a character study in itself.
Yeah. But I think the execs, having their discussions about it, I think they would have settled on either doing a Joker 2, or they will set this new Batman in that universe, and they can, because there's meant to be a time jump, right? Obviously, Bruce Wayne's a kid in that movie, and
this Batman's very young to begin with.
Exactly. And I've also, I don't know if this is true or not, I've been hearing this for a while. This isn't actually going to be set, in present day, which is unusual. There was talk that it's meant to be set in the 90s, and then I think the last I heard, the more conclusive evidence shows that it's set around the 2000s, which is
here's
weird.
Another element that supports the idea, right? Let's play devil's advocate and say it is somehow loosely connected, right? There is an element to support that, which is, you remember in the Joker, in this interpretation, in this universe, he meets Bruce Wayne, right?
Yeah.
And he's kind of like, he's got the red clown nose, and he's kind of fooling around with him and this type of stuff, in a very like Halloween outfit type of thing, right?
Yeah.
So, or a performance type of thing, being that he was a performance clown for the film, that was his job. So the Batman suit does look a little bit more Halloweenish outfit type of thing, with the collar and everything, than the bat suits that we've seen in the past. So it does bring up that question of, well, it doesn't look like it's in a completely different universe. For sure, I don't think it's our time. Like you said, it's not modern day. Joker was supposed to be what, the 70s or the 80s?
Was the early 80s, yeah.
Early 80s. This is maybe like 90s to early 2000s, maybe time frame. Time frame wise, that's about correct.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, time frame wise, and then
when
you look at
right now, would you bet against the Batman sequel featuring Joaquin Phoenix as the Joker? No.
Here's what I would say.
I wouldn't bet against it.
If I was Matt Reeves, here's what I would say, right? Or let's say I was involved, right? If I was Matt Reeves, what I would do is I would have a take that is so different with the cast that he has, because he has good pieces. Yeah. Right? He has a good cast. That's a strong foundation and a good starting point. And he has an interesting star with Pattinson that for sure would be open to going towards any more interesting direction than what's been done before, because Pattinson's that type of actor that he's gung-ho for, let's do something indie style with it, let's do something interesting with it, right? He's not just going to take a paycheck and let's do what I'm being told. He's going to want creative input. So what I would do is strong cast, strong foundation, very eccentric and odd actors, and visual looks to all of them. Um, I would do something where I make it a departure, where it's its own thing, right? And then what I would do is I wouldn't tie it into Joaquin Phoenix's Joker or Joaquin Phoenix's role, right? I wouldn't do that. What I would do is I would keep it the world, like let's say if I was Reeves, that has been set up, being its own oddity and its own distinct thing that departs a little bit from the comics, a little bit from the films. It's in like its own unique direction. And then what I would do to cash in on the success of Joker and to utilize Joaquin Phoenix is I would cast Joaquin Phoenix as the Joker, but then that Joker, I would have Joaquin Phoenix do a different performance. And it's an interesting thing if he would sign on for something like that. I don't know if he would. My assumption is it wouldn't need to be the same character and performance that was in the Joker, but it would need to be the same type of challenge and the same type of serious approach or interesting take, where he would sign on, and then I would say, great, you're playing this character again, but you're not playing it that way. You know, you had that one take, and then I would challenge him, and I would say, hey, Joaquin Phoenix, you've done this role before. I'm challenging you to do it again in a different way, to do it a different interpretation, different take. That way you still get Joaquin Phoenix, and you still get that kind of piggyback off of the Joker, but you're not going back to the Joker, because obviously Todd Phillips, I wouldn't really want involved, because Matt Reeves is involved at this point, Pattinson's involved at this point, all these other actors that are going to have their own involvement. It looks like it's going to shape up to be its own thing. But what I would do is, hey, Joaquin Phoenix, this is what we did with the first film. Do you like what we did? And as long as it's good, as long as it's solid, and Joaquin Phoenix says, yeah, like I think the world you created and the cast that you have and the approach that you took is very interesting, then I would say, great. I want you to play the Joker. Maybe not the second film, maybe the third, but somewhere along the trilogy. I want you to play the Joker within the world that we created, and I challenge you to take a different take. I think that would be a better way to approach it, because I don't think you want to go back to what Todd Phillips did with the Joker, because I look at that as a one-shot. I don't even think they should have a sequel to that. I think it should be a standalone film, one-shot, works really strong. Any sequel, I think, would detract from it, because I kind of like how it ended. You know, I like how it ended. I don't want to see a part two. I like to imagine the rest of it, you know, and kind of just fill in the blanks myself. And I would keep it a one-shot, but I would say, hey, jump on board to this cast and do this role again in a different way.
Yeah, I wouldn't be against. I mean, what you were saying about Joker being a one-shot, I fully buy. Rather than seeing a sequel, I would like to see a character study universe focusing on different characters built out from that movie, set in that world. I mean, you could have him play at some point the character as a locked up Hannibal Lecter type,
right?
You know, where like someone, you know, they just visit him and they need to question about something in Arkham. But in terms of a sequel, yeah, I think because it was designed to be standalone, it's better to stay that way. I'm not against the idea of him playing the character, but you know, doing a different take that
it could even be the same take, because the Joker is the type of character psychologically where, like you said, he's locked up for a couple years go by, his brain gets even more deranged and psychotic. He could be the type of character that in his brain could say, oh yeah, I'm not Arthur, I don't know who that is, and completely re-origin himself in his own head, you know, and you would buy it. You would buy into that. You'd be like, oh, I buy it. He's deranged. He's a psychopath. So I buy it.
It would come down to whether, you know, the Batman is set in the same universe as Joker, because it can confuse the audience. Like I think I mentioned that I spoke to a guy who thought Joker was a prequel to The Dark Knight. And I was explaining why none of that makes any sense, and he couldn't seem to wrap his head around it. I don't know why. People, like the casual audience, does get confused.
You're right, and then people might be confused coming off the Joker, thinking that it's the same thing with this Batman, right?
Exactly.
And then they're like, wait a minute, what is this?
That's
thing?
Why I wouldn't be surprised to see the two universes merged and see Joaquin play the Joker in the sequel. I mean, I just brought up a picture of the guy who plays Alfred just to see what he looked like in that movie. And even though he is older than Andy Serkis in real life, he looks quite young for his age. And I can buy that Andy Serkis is that character. Like they look similar enough where it's just a recast, you know?
And he had I think he punched the Joker. There was a scruffiness to him, right? He wasn't the typical gentleman butler. He was a little bit more
rough,
like what you might imagine Andy Serkis to be like.
Exactly.
Here's an interesting question. I don't know if you know how old Christian Bale was when he was cast in Batman Begins. Do you know how old he was?
He was younger than Robert Pattinson is now. I think he was 31.
Get out, really?
Yeah. So Pattinson,
because he looks
older. Yeah, he does. So Pattinson's slightly older now, but he looks younger, right? So
he looks younger. He looks like teenage type of looks, right?
This is the other thing.
20s or something.
Yeah. He looks like he can be early 20s, even though he's like early to mid 30s. Christian Bale was early 30s, but looked like mid to late 30s. He was. I've read different reports because it's never really specified what age he's meant to be in that trilogy. But when he becomes Batman properly in Batman Begins, I recall hearing Christopher Nolan say he's meant to be 26, right?
But okay, so here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. I mean, it's about visuals, right? So when I look at Michael Caine, I'm like, okay, 60, 70-year-old butler. When I look at Christian Bale, I'm like, late 30s, 40-year-old Batman.
That's what he
when
looks
I
like,
look at the visuals of when I look at Andy Serkis and Pattinson, I think, 40 to 50-year-old butler and 20 to 30-year-old Bruce Wayne.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, visually, that's just what they look like. So, how does that affect the story when I'm looking at? Because, okay, to be fair, you're saying Christian Bale was supposed to be the same age, but he looks older. So when I look at Christian Bale and I look at, obviously Michael Caine, Lucius Fox were much older looking than Christian Bale. And then Gary Oldman was a little bit older looking than Christian Bale, right? I take it that they're at an older age. But when I look at Pattinson and how old he looks, maybe not how old he is, but when I look at his face and how old he looks and his stature physically, and then I look at what this Gordon looks like. I look at what this Andy Serkis Alfred looks like. I look at what most of these other characters look like. The only ones that I look at visually, and I'm like, they're around the same age as Pattinson, is Catwoman and Paul Dano as the Riddler. Everybody else seems older. Even if it was Joaquin Phoenix, again, he seems older. So when I look at this Batman, that's the one issue that I have with this Batman is I was never into the beginnings of Batman. I was never into Batman learning to be Batman. My Batman has always been the full-on, prime, not too old, not too young, expertise Batman, like mid-40s, 40s to 50s, that type of thing. So, and the reason is because when I look at Pattinson, sort of like when you look at Leonardo DiCaprio, I see a baby face that looks younger than his age. So I look at him and I think Batboy, or I think Batman at the very, very, very like super beginning. And when I think about that, I'm like, anybody you cast as a villain outside of Catwoman and Dano, they're always going to seem older than him. Alfred's always going to seem older than him, of course, but this Alfred doesn't seem old to the point where he's not physically capable, which then leads me to this question. This Alfred seems more physically fit than Pattinson does, and he has a better physical stature. So, I mean, no joke, Andy Serkis is in good shape. So the thing is, I question, where does this Batman, like they say they want to focus on the detective. Is that all that this Batman is? Is he simply a detective, or is he a martial artist? If he's a martial artist, Christian Bale learned those martial arts from Ra's al Ghul, etc., blah, 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 Ducard. That's how they kind of explained it. I have to ask the question, does this Robert Pattinson Batman learn his martial arts from Andy Serkis Alfred? Because there is a comic book interpretation, which is the only interpretation in the comic books that I can think of, where the Alfred kind of looks like Andy Serkis, where he's physically capable. He's not an old butler, right? He's got a goatee. It's I believe it's Earth One Batman. There's a novel, Earth One Batman, where the Alfred has short hair, kind of like Serkis has. He has a goatee, and he's physically capable. He's like an ex-military martial artist. He kind of teaches, or he kind of spars. He spars with Batman at different times, and they kind of train, and he's capable in that way. When I look at this Andy Serkis and I look at this Pattinson, I ask myself, is there going to be no martial arts at all, and he's just a detective? Or if there is a martial arts, is he learning that martial arts from Alfred and his ex-British military career, or where is he learning that from? Is he learning it himself? He's got to learn it from somebody, because this is a young Bruce Wayne, right? So he's got to pick it up somewhere. And this is a very physically fit. Honestly, the most physically fit character, Gordon, all of them, is Andy Serkis. He's in the best shape, even in better shape than Pattinson. So you have to ask, is he going to teach him martial arts? Because there is a comic book where that is the approach.
I mean, that's something that already occurred to me, with this version of Alfred. Because obviously, I think more and more...
Gotham, the TV series, took that approach.
Yeah, I was going to say more and more with Gotham. And then I think there is a TV show that's just based around Alfred. I don't know what it's called. It's probably just called Alfred.
Pennyworth. I think it's called Pennyworth.
Yeah. So basically what I'm getting at is they've leaned more heavily into this idea that Alfred, this ex-SAS military guy, who's not just a butler, he's more of a bodyguard / butler. So perfect sense that he's trained Bruce. Like my version, my take, that wouldn't be enough. He would have to be a guy who, not that you would see this, because similar to you, I just want to see him as Batman. I don't need to see his, training to how he got there.
Right. You could assume he already has it.
Yeah. But like, just as a backstory, I would have had him, live in the middle of nowhere in like Thailand, training Muay Thai for, a year plus or whatever, and then like, in Brazil, learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or whatever it is. I would have him become like amazing at these things, but like learn different martial arts. It wouldn't be enough to just learn from like one sensei, whether it's Alfred or not. But in this particular take, in this movie, it's possible that that's the route they've gone by. But they are definitely going to do proper martial arts, because I think they've got one of the like fight choreographers from John Wick.
No, I think it's the same guy that worked with Keanu Reeves.
Right. So be interesting to see, because one of the big criticisms from Nolan's movies was the action sequences, and in particular the fight sequences were just not good.
They were pretty bad. Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt. I think I've seen some behind the scenes of that martial arts style. It was kind of a cool martial arts, but we never saw any of it. So it's that was one of those weird things. And I do know Pattinson's doing martial arts training by that same guy that you mentioned, so he's definitely training. Um, and we do know what the John Wick style kind of looks like, right? We got an idea
Yeah.
and a sense of it, and what it is motion wise. So if it's similar, we might have something similar, which Pattinson seems like he would be capable of. He's not that different physically from Keanu Reeves. I mean, it's not like Keanu Reeves is the most muscular or physically imposing dude, right? Um, it's just very weird to me how young he looks. Like when I think about scenes between him and Jeffrey Wright, obviously Jeffrey Wright, very gravitas, deep voice. Then you picture this young-looking Batman, uh, and then Andy Serkis looks like the most intimidating out of the whole cast in terms of like grunginess and look. Um, it's weird because, I mean, what's the difference really between Paul Dano and Robert Pattinson, looks-wise and physically? Like, what's the big difference between the two of them? Like, if you saw him as Batman and Paul Dano as Riddler, is Pattinson's Batman that much more physically intimidating?
It's I mean, they both just look like sociopathic, white guys. The main difference is
like skinny dudes, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it just looks
The
like
main
skinny
difference actually is Pattinson's jawline. So if someone said to me, Dano's playing Batman and Pattinson's playing the Riddler, if it wasn't for the jawline and the fact that Dano doesn't seem to have a jawline, right? You would think they're interchangeable, I suppose. Just looks-wise.
Do you see that scene? Have you seen Prisoners with Paul Dano and Jake Gyllenhaal?
Yeah, great film.
There's a scene in Prisoners because Gyllenhaal's generally in pretty good shape. So there's a scene in Prisoners where he first gets him into lockup, Paul Dano, and he's interrogating him. He has him against the corner of the room, and he's interrogating him, and Gyllenhaal keeps blinking. He has like a nuanced performance. He's trying to see if he's lying, and I think of that type of scene, and like in comparison, I could buy Gyllenhaal being intimidating because he's in good physical shape. But then I imagine Pattinson in a similar scene with Paul Dano. I don't see it. I don't see it. And I thought he was going to bulk up. I thought he was going to get bigger. I don't, from what I see from him, he got in shape, but it doesn't look like he put on more than 10, 15, 20 pounds of muscle, but not even 20, probably 10 to 15. That's a big question mark. I wonder if they're even going to have scenes like that, or they're going to eliminate them altogether, and he's just going to be spending his time in front of the back computer in the back cave solving mysteries. I mean, I think that's more likely. Honestly, I think that's more likely than seeing him in fight scenes.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're coming from. We'll have to see, obviously. I was disappointed when I saw him in the suit, and he just didn't look like that big, bulky Batman you expect. Like, my, take on Batman, apart from, like I said, he's this huge, monster of a man with these amazing martial arts skills. He's also incredibly violent. If he's taking on, a gang of thugs in the street, he's breaking arms and legs and, noses and all sorts, smashing people's teeth out. And Pattinson doesn't look like the type.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what they do there. I did want to go back. You did mention that you would approach it in an ultra realistic way, and you would focus on the psychopathic element. Why do you think it works better? So what don't you like about the fantastical elements, and why do you gear towards the more realistic approach?
It's not that I don't like the fantastical elements. In fact, I would actually love to see the type of Batman film that you described in that epic series of videos you did, where you've got this, the way you described it, this huge Gotham That
You know what's interesting about that? Because we talk about your 70%
mm,
psychopath and my 70% on fighting. Um, After the Chosen One conversation, because with Chosen One he was talking about Robin and he was talking about um, his take on Bruce Wayne and his take on Robin. And after that conversation, I took the what if question and I said, well, how would I change Robin? And it's funny because you know how we mentioned that when you approach it 70% psychopath, it changes the villains and it
yeah,
changes the setting and it changes Batman himself. I approach it 70% fighting, and that drastically changed my Robin character. Like the origin's completely different, the outfit's completely different, the dynamic with Batman's completely different. I essentially made him a blonde hair, blue eyed, Swiss or Danish Olympic gold medalist, where his parents didn't die, but they abandoned him as a kid because they were having a love affair and they were cheating, and it was like a one night stand, and he was the product of that. So that he has some like abandonment issues, but it's not because his parents died.
right.
And Bruce Wayne on a business trip to Europe discovers this child prodigy, Olympic gold medalist, gymnast, blonde hair, blue eyed character. And he takes him on as Robin. But to your point about the moralistically questionable aspects of Batman, I don't make his outfit red. I make his outfit, there's a real world Robin that's blue and white. And I make his outfit blue and white, and I have Batman use him as a decoy because that wouldn't make sense, right? Like, why are you dressed in blue and white?
Yeah,
That's going to draw so much attention, right? So I have Batman utilizing him as a decoy. So he's like someone you Olympic gold medalist, prodigy, genius, uh, acrobat, not from the circus, but completely like an Olympian, right? And blonde hair, blue eyes, blue and white outfit, decoy for Batman, and it's doing it that way. He's a decoy. Batman's coming out of the shadows and taking out criminals, right? But kind of moralistically brings into question he's using a child in the line of fire as a decoy, right? Not really caring or taking into account his life. But the factor of that is it brings into focus the physical elements of my approach because I want you to feel what it feels like to stare down the barrel of a gun and to be quick and fast and agile and strong as a martial artist, as an
yeah.
Olympian, as a gymnast. So that brings that into larger focus, and it focuses on the trust of the partnership. You know, obviously with Batman using Robin that way, he has to be watching his back. He has to be with batarangs or shurikens covering him and that type of thing. Or there's situations where he fails to cover him, and then they have a little falling out about that. Um, but it completely changed everything about Robin, just because my focus is 70% fighters.
Yeah.
So, you know, when your focus is, and I'm interested because when your focus is 70% psychopath, does that change Robin? Would you even have a Robin, or would you not even approach Robin?
I would.
Or how would you use a Robin to bring into focus the psychopathic
I
elements
would
of your
have
Batman?
a Robin. What you said isn't too dissimilar from a
Because
thought I've had.
it's interesting, right? Because the way I changed Robin brings into the fighting aspects of my Batman, right? It's almost
Yeah.
like I increase the volume of this approach and it gives you a focus on this Batman. So how would you change your Robin, if you had a Robin, to bring in a focus on your psychopathic Batman?
Interesting. Val, can you give me 2 minutes? I'll
Yeah.
be back. Right. Hold on, please. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm also going to think about this.
Okie dokie.
Hello, I'm back.
Nope.
Sorry about that. I was in desperate need of a bathroom break. So, what were we talking about? Robin. Yes. So, I've thought about this before, and I actually don't like when people dismiss Robin, which is something that Nolan did do. I remember after Batman Begins, and they were getting all these plaudits. Both he and Christian Bale were saying that they would never use Robin in their movies. And I know they used a character called Robin in The Dark Knight Rises, but that was a complete hatchet job. I mean, it doesn't resemble Robin really in any way.
It didn't really serve their story either. There was really no need for it. But...
It was just, I mean, yeah.
Essentially, they made him Nightwing right away.
Exactly, yeah. And here's the thing. Not to keep going back to these things, but The Dark Knight Rises, I think, was the way it was because no one actually wanted to make it. I think at that point, because of how successful The Dark Knight was and how big of a name Nolan was, he was getting blank checks to just make whatever movies he wanted to make since then. You know, with Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, and now Tenet. And I think it was basically a favor to the studio to come back, do a final Batman movie. Even after The Dark Knight, they were saying they don't know if they're going to come back. Is there really a need for a third movie? Third movies usually aren't that good, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think they really wanted to make it. It didn't feel like the passion was there. Even with The Dark Knight, you know, it's, we criticize and everything, but it still felt like there was a lot of passion that went into it. Whereas The Dark Knight Rises doesn't feel like that. It feels very kind of slapped together.
Like a hatchet job.
Yeah. But, and one other point that I was going to mention before I get back to Robin, which I will do, is because we're talking about the age of Batman. And what Nolan did actually doesn't make any sense. Because in Batman Begins, he's meant to be mid-20s, right? I think he did say he was specifically 26 for some reason, but whatever, it's mid-20s. And that movie leads straight into The Dark Knight, obviously with the Joker card at the end of the movie. And The Dark Knight takes place over several months. So from the time he becomes Batman in Batman Begins till the end of The Dark Knight, it's not even a year. It's like 6 months have passed or something like that. And then he disappears for like 7 years and then comes back with grey hair in The Dark Knight Rises.
And a bad knee and a bad back.
Yeah. And then he's Batman again for a few months or whatever it is. Like, I mean, he wasn't really Batman for very long. like it doesn't really make
And then
sense,
once he comes back, because you know when they showed him initially in the robe, he had some gray in his hair, and they kind of made him look a little older. Once he comes back, he cleans himself up, so he looks like the Bruce, the Christian Bale that he normally looks like. But if you look at Christian Bale in Dark Knight Rises, for some reason they had the bright idea of like, well, let's say he's been gone for many years and his body has been through things, so he's deteriorated. So they made him really thin looking. If you pull up a picture of Bruce Wayne, Christian Bale in Dark Knight Rises, and he's wearing a suit, there's a picture where he looks so thin. I had to look at it twice, and I was like, was he really that thin in this movie? And yeah, he looks insanely thin.
Yeah, and that ties into what I was saying, which is no one really cared about it. Because like for Batman Begins, that was the first time for Christian Bale as well. I know he was a child actor and did all these, movies with Steven Spielberg and what have you, Empire of the Sun. But he he hadn't done as an adult like a big blockbuster before, and he really wanted to. He thought he wanted to get into that world, and all he got really after outside of Batman was that Terminator movie, which didn't work out. So he focused
Christian
on
Bale, he
what he
has
does best.
he's a good actor, right?
Yeah, he is.
And he's got, I would say, 3 performances that I've seen that are really weak. One of them playing Batman. The other one, Harsh Times, I think was pretty weak. And then the third one, God, which one was it? I'm forgetting it. It's slipping my mind. So the question is, because he's also cast in the new Thor movie for Marvel.
Yeah, he's the villain supposedly. Yeah.
Do you think? I mean, because I don't know how you could do worse than what he did with Batman. His Bruce Wayne was good, but his Batman was pretty bad. Do you think his Marvel performance will be better than him playing Batman in comparison?
Probably. Well, here's the thing: because he's doing
a villain,
right, and and he's the villain, and it's more light-hearted. He probably will have more leeway to, maybe be a bit more comical or a bit more out there, try different things. So you never know. He might do something interesting in that way with it. Whereas his Batman ultimately ended up being quite bland and forgettable. But my point really was that he did. I've heard him talk about this. He wanted to go down the path of being a movie star and doing these big movies, but he retreated from that after the Terminator movie he did, because it just didn't work
when you
out.
Say he wanted, when you say he wanted to go down the path of being a movie star, because I never heard it. Like, in what sense? Because he's a very good actor. But you're saying he always wanted to be a movie star or go that way, or he wasn't sure and then he went that way and he didn't like it and now he does more character stuff.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah. So he obviously he was a child actor. I saw this interview after, I think it was Batman Begins. It might have been after The Dark Knight, but I'm pretty sure it was after Batman Begins. And it's a really rare interview because I can't find it anywhere online, but I definitely saw it. And he said, the reason he played Batman was he always wanted to do like a big budget movie like that. And he also thought that would open the doors for him doing these other big budget movies and becoming a movie star and making all this money. And he said, but it didn't seem to happen. Right? This must have been after Batman Begins because he wasn't getting those offers. And it was only after The Dark Knight where he got the Terminator offer. And
that's also where he had that leak where he
had that meltdown, right?
Yeah.
And I remember when he apologized for that, he goes, look, ultimately I'm an actor. I don't know how to be a movie star. And this is not, he goes, I want to work on set. So, all these distractions annoy me. And he goes, I shouldn't have lost it all. But the language he was using indicated that he wasn't comfortable in that movie star role. So aside from these Batman movies and that one-off, he went back to just doing, real films. Yeah, some of them have been big budgets, and some have been like the Exodus movie he did with Ridley Scott, and one second, Val. I seem to have lost you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm back.
He wasn't comfortable.
Yeah, he wasn't comfortable. I think the leak had a lot to do with it. All the bad publicity he was getting, all that type of thing. And he retreated to doing, proper films, which is where he works best. And a lot of these are big budgets in their own way. That's why he ultimately did Batman Begins. There was also a thing where fans online, Batman fans, were petitioning Warner Brothers to cast him, because he had like a cult following on the back of.
He did. I remember he had a large.
Yeah, following. American Psycho and Equilibrium were the two big ones where people wanted him as Batman. But the point is, he took that movie very seriously, and he literally just did The Machinist before it, and he was a skeleton in that. So for Batman Begins, he bulked up massively, and it was hard, obviously, to go from being ultra thin, like he's in The Machinist, to this, because he does look like a bodybuilder in Batman Begins. And the point is, by the time The Dark Knight Rises rolled around, no one cared. He didn't care, so he didn't bother getting into shape for it. Even Tom Hardy, one of the things is he is part CGI in the entire movie.
In the Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, his.
You mean his physicalness?
Yes, yeah. Look at the behind the scenes.
Because he was in good shape in The Warrior.
Yeah, he was. He's one of these guys who can fluctuate up and down, because he's naturally, his frame is quite bulky. But if you look at the behind the scenes photos, his arms are nothing like as big as they are in the movie, and he's still got all his tattoos and everything visible. So they CG'd him, but it's quite good. You can't really tell. But yeah, the point is, no one was taking that movie seriously. Anyway, it was the age thing.
Gosh, isn't there even a scene in Dark Knight Rises where Bruce Wayne and Bane are in a cell, and he's having a conversation with them about getting out of the pit and blah blah blah. I'm thinking to myself, this is surreal. They're sitting here having a conversation in what? How would that ever? I don't know. It didn't make sense to me, but
yeah, it didn't. I mean, the whole idea that they left him alive, just I don't know. The plot was really bad. But before I got distracted and went off on a tangent, we're talking about Robin, and
and the psychopath.
Yeah, so I had thought about this. And obviously I was talking about how I don't like when Robin gets dismissed, because to me he is an integral character, right? So I do like the idea that his parents do get murdered and he's orphaned, because that's the exactly, that's the pathway that Bruce looks at and wants to take him in. But so this ties back into psychology. Because he is crazy, he raises this kid to be a human weapon, right? And he uses him, like you were saying, as a kid, to do things that he can't, when he's trying to, solve his crimes and all that. Now, obviously, this becomes very dangerous when you're going down the path I want to go down, where it's ultra realistic, because putting a kid in those situations is not going to end well.
But that could be very interesting. If you remember Leon the Professional, Natalie Portman's, I think that was her debut role as a child actress. Yeah. Super realistic, gritty, violent type of film, and she was really young. And that was probably one of her best performances to this day.
Probably is her best performance, to be honest. But
it is her very first performance.
But the child Robin he would use, not necessarily just as a decoy, but he could send him to do reconnaissance stuff or whatever that he can't do himself, because it's less obvious if there's a kid there who no one suspects is gathering information or what have you. But the story of Robin in my version is basically one of abuse. He is made, by Bruce, like I said, to be a human weapon.
This is interesting, right? Because you say it's a story of abuse, and I was just thinking that 3 minutes ago. Here's the interesting part. When you say it's a story of abuse. Now, obviously, your focus is inherently very psychological,
Yeah.
right? Um, in my version, it's also a story of abuse, but I have him same as you, use him as a human weapon. Uh, I have him where he has no connection, so that link where they both lost their parents through death, I take that away, which makes the Batman character a little bit more manipulative and a little bit more selfish because there is no emotional link there. He just sees him as an asset he can
Yeah.
use. But the abuse comes through the physical component and the mental component of making a child a human weapon. So I'm very interested to see why is that important why is that because we both have a very different approach, but we still both have that element of abuse. Why is that an important element that even though we take different approaches is the same? And how does that reflect or strengthen the Batman character?
It's important because it's a part of Batman. It gives you another glimpse into his psyche, the way his mind works. Only someone who is, detached would send a kid into dangerous situations. And like in my version, I don't think he would look at it like he's being abusive. I don't think he would look at it like that in your version either, because the way he thinks, right?
Right. It's like a way of
Right.
life. And
Now, obviously, your one is a bit different because of the manipulation. Maybe on some level, he has to be aware of that. Whereas my one is more like he sees.
it would be, you know what type of metaphorical manipulation it would be?
Mm,
It would be, like, and there are comics where they reference this that Nightwing Robin was always better in certain aspects of the job than Batman, right? Being that he's a natural acrobat and those types of things. The way that I would approach it is I wouldn't just make him like a natural acrobat like in the circus. I would make him an Olympic child
yeah.
gold medalist. So I look at it in a sense of the manipulation is one of Robin's like the flame. Like if you want to think of him like the Olympic fire, you know how there's a torch in the
Yeah.
Olympics and that's the flame and the brilliance. So he's like the Olympic fire, and Batman has a partner that's a childhood genius, prodigy,
Mm,
physical specimen. So it's like trying to contain fire. He's trying to contain that genius IQ and physical awareness and the fact that he's a child and the age and the combustibility of that prodigy, right? He's
yeah.
trying to contain him so he can still use him within the grand scheme of things. In your version, when you talk about abuse and manipulation, is it just psychological, or is it the fact that he's putting him in dangerous situations, or is it more than
It's
that?
that and more. Um, so let me just touch on something real quick. I did write a Batman story, a couple of them actually,
Okay.
that were jump offs from Batman Begins. Basically, it was how would
So after
yeah,
Batman
it's like
Begins came
how
out.
would I have written the sequel, and then ended the trilogy, and I did
Right.
introduce Grayson in the first sequel, and I aged him up so he was a teenager.
How old would you say?
He was like 17. I can't remember
Okay,
exactly, but he
17 years
wasn't
old.
like 13. He was older. He was a young man basically, and I had him rather than being an acrobat, I had him as a
Hmm.
world championship martial artist, right? And his family had a
Before
yeah,
he
yeah,
met
and his
Batman.
family, instead of being acrobats, had a world-renowned dojo in Gotham, right?
Okay.
And his parents get killed, similar to as in the comics. Batman takes him in, and he's already got this amazing platform. I mean, I know in the comics he's like with your one, an acrobat. Sorry, a gymnast in your one. My one, as he's a martial artist, and Bruce molds him from there. That
Hmm.
I only thought to mention that because I have thought about this before, and that is jumping off from Batman Begins, how I would have done it. So the fact that I changed him to a martial artist, and it's a bit similar to what you were thinking. But in the version that I would want to see from scratch of Batman, I like the idea where he, as a child, Dick Grayson, doesn't really have anything beyond his natural ability. He's not like a formed acrobat or anything like that. So it becomes a relationship of abuse because Bruce basically takes this child who reminds him of himself simply because he's been orphaned and spends years essentially molding him to be basically Man 2.0, like the perfect version of what he wants to be, whereas Bruce had to learn himself and go in and do the training and all that, but he can pass all of that knowledge, skills onto this child. Whether he,
so it almost becomes like a dependency because he idolizes.
Exactly, and it's like I said, he's sending him into dangerous situations as well, and ultimately he's not giving this child a childhood, but he's not giving him the option of what he wants to do with his life. Have a normal childhood and grow and learn. He's forcing him to be the way he wants, and obviously, as he's older, he becomes Robin, the sidekick who actually goes out with him. I mean, you couldn't do all of this in one movie. This would obviously have to be over a trilogy or something. And then eventually he would, similar to in the Titans TV show. I don't know if you've watched Titans.
I watched the first season. I haven't seen the
season one
season.
was much better than season two. And season two's got good things, but it's just not as strong. Yeah, it's just not as strong, especially with things like the miscasting of Bruce and things like that. But ultimately, the idea that you saw this in season one, how Dick has to break away from Bruce to become his own man, go down his own path, and essentially just leads him to being Nightwing, right? Like he can't really ever get away because that's all he knows. He's essentially like a Batman 2.0, like I said, right? So I would explore that. You know what? I would love to explore that in a Dick Grayson movie, a Robin movie.
It's interesting because a lot of the filmmakers that have kind of tackled Batman have put the Dick Grayson character aside, but it's an interesting character, right? Because like let's go with your version where Batman's psychopathic and that's a focus, right? When you talk about bringing in Dick Grayson, it brings up interesting thematic ideas because I'm assuming this character would you have him have his own psychological issues already because his parents died? Because when I remove the death of his parents, that removes his psychological issues in a way, in terms of grief, and it's a little bit less of that type of thing. It's a little bit more of abandonment. So it becomes more about an Olympian proving himself and that type of obsession, which works with Batman because he's trying to prove himself to them Batman. But in your version, does he have psychological issues already to where his parents passed away, similar to how Bruce did, but then they're compounded by the fact that Bruce takes him in, takes away the childhood, and gives him even more psychological issues and war type of war situations and combat stressors and things like that? Or do you have it where he's pretty even keel, and then Batman's a large part of why he has psychological issues? Or do you have it where he's unaffected by psychological issues and he just has a more level head than Batman?
All very interesting. I think as a losing his parents, both his parents, it has to have a psychological effect on him. Otherwise, he would be, a sociopath, right? And
you do it the same way where how the death happens, or do you change how the death happens?
to be honest, it doesn't really matter because the way I would do it, he would be. He would. I would want him to be young, right? So it. Like in my version, it wouldn't really matter. So I would stick with the acrobats and the circus and all that, just because there's no need to change it. It doesn't affect anything in my version, because ultimately he is raw as a child. He doesn't have all these skills and everything yet. I mean, maybe he's got a little bit, obviously, of the acrobatic thing going on, being involved. Yeah,
because he's so young.
But he's not at any kind of level where it matters. So I would probably stick to how it is in the comics, just because there's no reason to change it. I like the idea that even though it's affected him, he hasn't really had time to grieve properly, because Bruce has taken that away from him and put him straight into training, essentially. And it's weird, right? Being adopted by this psychopath who's got you.
Who's also.
I was about to say that. So he's got. It's a double-edged sword, right? Because he's got this. Or catch-22 one, because he's got this lifestyle now where he doesn't have to worry about anything. But he is, like I said, not being allowed to live a childhood, not being allowed to grieve. He's essentially being kidnapped, just legally.
And now he's worrying about knives and gunshots and fights. Like, he's not worrying about. He's got the billionaire lifestyle, but now he's on the streets.
Like injecting a young Dick Grayson into my take on Batman is insane. Like, you could make it work, and like I said, you would have to see it develop over several films. And I would love to see his own movie. I suppose this is kind of what they've done with Titans, where it's about how he grows and becomes Nightwing, but that is obviously very fantastical, and it's not just about Dick, even though he is the lead. The others get a lot of screen time. So again, mine would be a ultra realistic 70s style take. It's interesting to think, right, that people praise Nolan's movies for being realistic, and yet for me, they're not realistic enough. Right?
I don't even think they're realistic at all. I mean, they're exposition filled, right? And when I say exposition filled, they're exposition filled. Like, he explains things he doesn't really need to explain, but he has this need to explain because it equates to being realistic. But just because you know where something comes from doesn't make it realistic. Just because you know how something works doesn't make it realistic, right? Like, Batman Begins, David Goyer could say, "Hey, this is my doohickey air heating machine, or air dehumidifier, whatever it is, and I'm going to show you how it works and the pieces and the parts." And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't make logical sense of why it's in the plot of your story, or realism in terms of people buying in. And I think that was the idea, that, if I show you how everything works, you'll buy in because it's realistic. But like you said, realism to you is the psychological aspect of the characters and the approach of the character work in the film. It's not necessarily like, hey, these are the pieces of Batman's suit.
You know what it just reminded me of? Have you ever seen a British film from last decade? That should be the decade before now. Called
not a British film, but I saw Happy.
No, there was a movie called Franklin with Ryan Philippe. Okay, it was like an independent British film. It's very underrated. Not that it's like spectacular or anything, but for what it is, with it had a relatively small budget, or incredibly small budget for Hollywood standards, big for English independent standards. But don't want to spoil anything for you. But essentially, there is a character in this movie who is disturbed, and he's like a vigilante, but he doesn't see the world how you and I see it. And it's mostly set in London, right? But when you see it through his eyes, it's like a comic book world, right? In fact, it's probably the closest thing to the type of Gotham that you've described, even though it's because obviously of the budget, the movie, the set really big, when you can see there's a lot of CG used to achieve what they want. But it's this like endless, this like never-ending, huge, mega Gothic type city. It's even called Meanwhile City because obviously comic book panels, it's like Meanwhile, which is the way this crazy character views things. Yeah, you just reminded me of it, talking about Franklin with a Y. This is 2008.
2008.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe you just watch the trailer now. I'm sure it's only a couple of minutes.
I can't watch it now because I'm on my phone, but I get the idea of what you're saying in terms of the city, and mainly I'm interested to see.
Because this is why I thought it'd be interesting if you watch it and like gauge your live reaction to it. But yeah, it's it's not too dissimilar from the type of things we're talking about. Although, see, my version of Batman, he would see things distorted, but not to that level, right? Not where he's looking at buildings that aren't actually there and things like that. He would just have like a warped perspective of things, right?
Like where you shift, you ever see one of those films where you see an event happen from one perspective and then you see it happen from another perspective? It's not that the characters have hallucinations or delusions,
as they see,
they misinterpret someone's behavior or they attribute aspects of someone's personality that don't.
Exactly, and my version of Bruce would see everything kind of in a negative light, like all these criminals, whatever they're doing to him, it's like a million times worse. Yeah, that's
that makes realistic sense because you could argue that that's an effect or a symptom of his psychological trauma. Like it would be
like it would be the idea is obviously he's never got over. It's not just the fact that his parents were murdered; it's they were murdered in front of him, at a particular age, and it's weird. It's like he had his childhood taken from him, but at the same time, he wasn't able to grow up, Are we disconnected again? I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Hello, hello.
And I'm back. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Sorry about that, but we should be good now. I'm plugged in 100%. So
okay, good. What were we discussing?
You were saying that his childhood was taken from him
Oh,
Um,
it's weird. So it's taken from him, but he's also kind of stuck in adolescence, right? Because apart from being a psychopath, you would also have to have a certain level of immaturity
mhm.
to dress up as a bat and to embrace this vision idea the way he does. Because like a not a normal person, because obviously you'd still be psychotic anyway, but a well, I shouldn't interchange those because obviously a psychopath is different from someone who's psychotic. But anyway, the point is, a regular person who wants to be a vigilante is more like what you see in Taxi Driver, right? Whereas this guy's doing it in a costume and he's hanging out in this bloody cave all the time. He's got these gadgets and his souped up car.
And unlike Travis Bickle, he's a
Billionaire, which I was about to say.
And he has a butler, which must fuel this issue that he has. It must fuel it because of the detachment that billionaires tend to have.
Exactly. I was about to say that as my next point. That allows him to stay in this limbo where he is, basically playing dress up, but he's so disturbed that it's real for him,
You know what's funny? It's like a psychotic incubation because he's a wealthy billionaire, but that's realistic because is it that Michael Jackson, right? He was super wealthy, and a lot of people say because he was so wealthy, he again they say childhood was taken from him, child star, abusive father, that type of thing, and they say that his wealth and his lack of a childhood later on caused him to kind of live in his own world, sort of say. Yeah. Because that's what all the money in the world does from such a young age, where you're missing a childhood and then you grow up. I think Justin Bieber said the same thing, that he was a child star, he had all this money, and then that causes a psychological. It's a very difficult transition from childhood to adulthood because of the psychological issues that come up because of that.
Yep. I'm just thinking more about this now, and it ties into things like the Batmobile, right? Like only someone with like an immature mindset would have a, weird looking car, call it the Batmobile. Things like it's like you see in real life with people with a lot of money and their car collections. The people who are the most immature have the most ridiculous vehicles, right? Like there's
not only that, but it's the naming of it too. Like I'm going to the Batcave, Alfred. Like even a character saying that, you're thinking to yourself, man, this guy's got some stuff going on.
Exactly.
He's got some issues. Like there's some issues here.
Exactly, and this is one of the things that I didn't like with Nolan's trilogy, where they never call it the Batmobile. It's always the Tumbler, right? And I know that was probably taken from The Dark Knight Returns, because I think it's her name, Kerry Kelly, isn't that the Robin in that? She calls it the Batmobile or something like that. And I think there's a line where Batman says, "Oh, that sounds like something a kid would say, like Robin would used to say or something." So I think that's where they got it from. But I like the idea that Batman himself calls it that, because it just ties into, again, this guy being unhinged.
Mm-hmm. He's in. I think there's a word for it. It's not hallucination or delusion or anything like that. But there's a word for it. He's in a state of. I don't want to say heightened reality, but psychologically there's a word for it. It's not hallucination. It's something else, but it does exist in that type of way.
Yeah, this is
like usually people that are very ego driven to an extreme, or an over ego development, that kind of thing.
Yeah. This is the type of thing I was talking about before with this movie, Franklin. Obviously, that goes to a different level where he is. He's delusional. This guy, he's seeing things that physically aren't there. But it's the same type of psychological issues that my take on Batman would share. And there's also a visual that I have for my Batman, which again no one's ever done. I don't know why, because it doesn't matter who the actor is. All of them have done this, right? When they're wearing the cowl, you can clearly see they've got black paint around their eyes. But when they take it off, obviously they're clean, right? Mm-hmm. My one would have it on. Like, it would be like you would see him put it on, like rubbing it over his eyes like it's war paint or something before he puts his mask on. And it would be like a kind of Travis Bickle moment,
It adds to the psychoticness of it, especially when he takes off the cowl and he still has the black.
Exactly, yeah. It's just a visual that I've always pictured with this take, man. This realistic take. And
it would help you think, like when let's say he goes into the Batcave, he takes off the mask and he's got that black around his eyes and he's talking to Alfred. Just that visual hallmark makes you think, man, there's something up with, like, again, it hints to the fact that there's something psychologically unhinged, because you're looking at a butler and you're looking at a guy with black around his eyes in a cave, talking to him about whatever it is, war and crime or this or that or whatever type of thing, and you're thinking to yourself, this is not normal. Yeah. like without that, normally when you're looking at it, you're like, oh, this is Christian Bale's face. He looks like Christian Bale, the actor, and you're like, okay. But with the black around the eyes, you're thinking, I don't know. This is a little weird.
Like, I want my Alfred to be scared, right? Like, I want him to break down. I want a scene in the movie where he's crying because he can't help this guy that he's bound to. And what we can do is look after him and help him heal, and just make sure he gets by day to day.
It's also the struggle is real. It brings into question, birds of a feather flock together, in the sense of all this time with Bruce Wayne, is Alfred losing his own sanity, or is he trying to keep his own sanity? Because I could easily see how your Alfred could easily be struggling with his own sanity, just by association.
100%. It would be like a single parent trying to look after the most unruly child you've ever seen, and they're just losing their mind, right? Which,
like the voice of logic, right?
But that's
not a losing battle.
It's exactly what it is, and it's not that far off it, because, like I said, he would have had to have raised Bruce once his parents were murdered. So he couldn't, you could probably, I wouldn't want to show it or whatever, but as a backstory, you could probably have this idea where he could see that this kid was off the rails, and he was sending him to psychiatrists and psychologists and whatever else there is, but nothing was helping, and he tried his best to, keep him from going down this type of path, but you can't. And also, you can't always see these things, right? You don't realize how gone the guy is until maybe something big happens. Maybe it starts off where, as he gets older, he discovers this old cave on the grounds and stuff. He just starts spending a lot of time in there, and Alfred's like, what's wrong with you? And I would even have it where that's where he develops his bat persona. Nothing to do with he's scared of bats and they were watching a theater that had bats in it, and he's spending so much time in this cave and there's these bats everywhere that it.
What's even scarier is if you really extend that, right? And you imagine a young Bruce Wayne taking martial arts classes in secret, playing around in this cave, these bats, this outfit, whatever, in secret. And you imagine Alfred finding out about it later, and he goes to approach the kid, and the kid is already like a martial artist that's formidable and kind of physically intimidates Alfred, as well as the psychological unhingement.
Well,
That would be
exactly.
interesting.
And that's the thing. Like, my version of Bruce would intimidate anyone. Like, I want this guy to be massive, like 6'4" minimum, right? And a huge frame as well. And like the bodybuilder aspect, which is something that no one ever really talks about. Although, like I said, Christian Bale did get into like some kind of bodybuilding shape for Batman Begins. And my version wouldn't look completely warped like what you see in the comics, but he would definitely be like a serious bodybuilder. It's a huge guy.
And they touch upon it. I know Ben Affleck in Snyder, one of the Snyder films, they show him training at one point, but they do it with like tires and ropes, and it's a little bit, I don't know, something's weird about it. And like he's pulling a tire across a line of fire or something like that, but then you're like, why is the line of fire there? It's a little.
It was weird because
a little weird.
It made me. That was in Batman v Superman, and it made me think, why is this guy doing CrossFit to try and take on Superman?
Exactly. Like I pictured, like you said, the physical stature, the martial arts, the bodybuilding, but it's within the routine of the character. So I picture him regularly training on a body bag. I picture regularly lifting, but not to where it's like, okay, cue the training sequence. We're going into a training sequence. I would just have him doing it in, like, if he's having a dialogue scene, I would have him curling weights at the same time. Like, it would be included in the background.
Like, I think the closest we got to that with Nolan was in Batman Begins, when Alfred goes to get him out of bed because it's like in the afternoon, and he gives him his like fruit juice, and Bruce does like 20 push-ups on the floor in his pajamas.
Yeah. No, it's that type of thing. Like, it's something he should be doing while having a dialogue scene. It's not something that, okay, cue the training sequence. Not that you can't have a training sequence, you could, but it's more believable when it's something he does all the time.
Yeah. And I mean, I know bodybuilders, and they're like that. Like, those are the people who are struggling the most right now with this whole stay-at-home quarantine lockdown thing, because the gyms all closed, right? And they they've got some equipment at home, but it's not the same, and they don't have the same equipment. They don't have all those big machines and whatnot, so they are struggling. I mean, I know one guy. They said for us over here, you're allowed to go out once a day for exercise. This guy went for like a 10-kilometer run through like 4 different boroughs of London and back, and I'm pretty sure, right? And I think they realized people are doing things like that, so they've now said today, if you're going to go and exercise, you have to stay near your home, right? You have to be on your block. You can't just go where you want, right? Because these guys they have like Arnie probably talks about it best in Pumping Iron.
Yeah, and it's the food, it's the diet,
but like
it's
in Pumping Iron, it's like, I mean, these guys are serious addicts. Like, if they can't work out for even a day, they feel sick. They're no different from like heroin junkies, right? Where they need that hit every day. So I was going to say Arnie in Pumping Iron, he's saying that, when he's lifting weights, he goes, it's like he's coming, right? So it's like, if you can imagine, he goes, it's like I'm coming all day and all night, right? It's like, it's the best feeling in the world.
He says that it's better. It's also I think one of the knocks against Pattinson is that he just doesn't have that stature. It's one of the negative elements.
The thing is, like I said, he is quite tall. He's taller than he looks. I don't know how that will play, because obviously there's all sorts of camera trickery they do where they can take shorter actors like Tom Cruise and make him look taller and what have you. But it is it's really the frame. It's like going back to, the UFC. When you see, there's martial artists in different weight classes where it doesn't automatically make sense, right? Until you look at the frame of the person. So, for example,
You mean we're from like a featherweight to like a middleweight?
so for
or
example, you
heavyweight?
can have like a featherweight who's much taller than, let's say, a middleweight, but they are much slimmer. It's their natural frame. It doesn't really matter how much time they spend in the gym. They can't bulk out to having that, that big bulky frame. And the frame is a lot that dictates what weight class these guys are in, right? And it gets to do with having bigger bones and that type of thing, which all fits in. And
Yeah, I think it's like a ectomorph,
exactly, yeah.
mesomorph. They just
yeah,
don't have
and
the
that's the
build.
thing. So yeah, my version of Batman, he can't just be tall. It doesn't matter. He needs to be big. Like I said, he needs to look like he can punch through brick walls. And like I said, he would be violent. He would be breaking people's bones quickly as well because he's so well trained.
Yeah, and the physical aspect only adds to that.
And we didn't get that with Keaton. We're not going to get that with Pattinson. Bale was the closest in Begins, but
he was the closest, but they've all been kind of pretty far away from where it should be.
Because Bale also doesn't look like a really big guy. Like, I'm not sure how tall he is. He looks kind of tall, but not. Like, he just, you know what I mean? He does, like, the whole point of, I know I'm repeating myself and whatever, but the whole point I'm trying to drive home is he is physically imposing and intimidating to anyone he comes across. So that's how we kind of got sidetracked with this. It's about Alfred is physically scared of this guy. So, what would happen to him if he kind of has to be submissive to this guy that he lives with and is around all the time.
Well, it's that idea that he's bigger than all the other characters he interacts with, so there's a level of intimidation. Whereas with most of the actors that have played it, they're usually smaller in stature, so it doesn't, like maybe Keaton can do it like performance-wise, but it's not because of the physical aspect. That's kind of out of the picture. Even Bale, he's not. I don't think he's that big a guy. I know he was fit, but he's not a big guy. Where would you say, or what would you say was your first exposure to the Batman character? Was it the comics? Was it the films? And what was like? Do you lean towards some other characters, or do you find the character interesting in and of itself?
So it's interesting. So I, from when I was really young, was really into comics and action figures. So that's how I discovered most of these characters, including Batman. With the Tim Burton movies, I kind of like them, but I never loved them to the point where it made me, more interested in the character. The character, like I was more of a Marvel guy. I was more into Spider-Man and the X-Men, and again, not because of the cartoons. This is prior to that.
And that's an interesting thing because those are both more fantastical properties.
The Hulk. I was into this stuff, and my kind of attraction to Batman came as I got older, because it's this. So if you ask me, when I was a teenager, early 20s or something like that, what I would want to see for Batman, I don't think I would go with this ultra realistic take. I would want to see something more along the lines of what you want to see, which is this more fantastical take.
When did that change?
I think probably probably my mid-20s when I I always watched the 70s movies growing up, and I used to like them, but I don't think I appreciated them as much as I did when I kind of hit my mid-20s. I'll give you a good example. I always used to think Goodfellas was better than The Godfather, right? And look, don't get me wrong, they're both amazing kind of 10 out of 10 films. But Goodfellas always held my attention more. And then probably around my mid-20s, it flipped. And I was like, no, The Godfather's much more subtle and nuanced. You know, they've both got great performances in them. But what Pacino does is like unmatched. You know,
it's not as overt.
And you know, there's a more kind of operatic feel to The Godfather. I think it's just a maturity thing. You know, you hit like a certain age. It's different for different people. So for me, it was probably around mid-20s where it was just a stronger appreciation for those types of films. And that's just where my movie interests became geared towards. So anything, whether it's Batman or, you know, Daredevil's one where at one point the idea was to reboot it in a 1970s style. I think it was meant to be set in the 70s as well.
So it's not so much. So let me ask you this question. It seems that it's not, because you know, you're obviously, when you were younger, a fan of X-Men and Spider-Man and characters like that. So it doesn't seem that you switch necessarily from a fantasy approach to ultra realistic, but that you switch towards more character nuance and focus on performance. Now, if there was a fantasy approach with the nuanced approach to character and performance and acting that you would normally see with a Taxi Driver or with Godfather or something, Goodfellas, would that work? Like, you take the same performances and you put them in a fantasy setting.
I would probably appreciate those a lot more than if they didn't have those elements. Now, what you just said actually is worded better than what I said. Like, you've really hit the nail on the head, because it, I could see it, and I was very aware of it in my own writing. Right, so I've been writing since I was a kid, actually. Right, and all of my stories they were always plot driven, right? And those were generally most of the films that would interest me as well. Again, with maturity, I think I started to realize that, well, not realize, but you just, you know, like I said, you grow a different appreciation for. You're like, plot stuff can be interesting when you have like a Memento or Matrix or something that is, you know, what do they call it? They call it high concept plot. Yeah.
High concept, right? There's like two approaches. Some people approach storytelling plot driven, and some people approach
character,
it
exactly. So there was a time where it flipped for me, and I started writing more character driven because it was more interesting. It's more mature, and it's not just, oh, people say it's more mature, so therefore that's true. It was a natural part of my growth as a writer. I realized that's what I was doing more and more because that became more interesting to me. And I think, look, there's a lot of adults out there who love going and watching these Fast and Furious movies that make no sense, where Vin Diesel's flying a car through the air.
I think the last one they're driving and The Rock is holding onto the car, and he's holding onto the chain that's holding onto the helicopter, and they're driving over the cliff, and he's literally pulling the two together, and it's like, okay, we've jumped the shark here. This is we're at this point now. Yeah, we're at this point.
Like I think there's a lot of adults obviously who do like that, but I think most of the money from those films comes from.
But the very first Fast and Furious.
No, it wasn't. And that's the only one I think
that.
Is a decent movie.
It was more
essentially a remake
driven.
of Point Break. But yeah, I think most of the money for those movies does come from the like 25 and under crowd, because I do think most adults prefer character-driven stories. It's just more interesting, and a really good example of what we're talking about is Game of Thrones. Right, when it was good and it was based heavily on the books, it was all character-driven drama. Right, the more it got away from the books and they couldn't rely on them because they didn't have them, etc., the more plot and action-based it became, the less interesting it was, and the more people didn't like it.
It's true. I never watched Game of Thrones, but I did hear from a lot of people that did watch it that as the seasons went on, that did happen, and it's I think it's an interesting thing, because I don't know if there's any film that exists that goes opposite to what I'm about to say, but you usually get one or the other, and what I mean by that is, usually you get a film that's very character focused and there's a strong performance, or usually you get a film that's very strong visually and atmospherically, but you don't get that character performance. Or if it's an ensemble, you don't get all the characters to perform that strongly. Like let's say you had an ensemble piece, and what you would get from a De Niro in Taxi Driver, what you would get from a Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, or what you would get from Joaquin Phoenix or Daniel Day-Lewis in Gangs of New York, where you want the whole ensemble cast to give you that strong of a performance, but not just one performance like Heath Ledger, but the whole cast to give you that level of performance, and then have that in a fantasy visual film, not like Tim Burton, but sort of like that type of director. I don't think that exists. The closest thing that I can think of is it gets balanced between the two. So like maybe you get something like a T2 Terminator Judgment Day, or you get something like Gangs of New York, where there is a little bit of a fantasy element and strong performances from the whole cast, or like a The Django Unchained, where there's a very strong visual element to it, but the performances are also strong. Usually Tarantino can do that, where he has an ensemble and he has strong performances from all of them, and yet still his films have a very strong visual quality, right? Like,
most of his films are like that. Pulp Fiction's like that. Reservoir Dogs is like that, yeah.
Pulp Fiction, yeah. So maybe Tarantino's a prime example of where he gets both. But you don't normally see both.
What you're talking about is 100% accurate, and you completely nailed it by mentioning Tarantino, because that's the example I always use to people. So to try and keep things simple, this is how I differentiate movies from films when I'm trying to be like a movie snob for whatever reason, right? It's something from like a Entourage, the TV show, right? And ultimately, movies tend to be the more plot-driven, spectacular action type things, right? And films are the more nuanced character pieces. Movies and films. And
what would you call the ones that have both? Masterpieces?
Well, those are the ones cinema? where it's always like on a spectrum, right? Like how much of a movie and how much of a film. Tarantino is always the example I go to for a guy who consistently delivers a mix, like a balanced mix, right? Because I mean, there's most of his movies, including Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, the early stuff, right? They feel like movies in a lot of ways, which is why they made well, Pulp Fiction made a lot of money. Reservoir Dogs, people didn't know who he was at that time, but they're very crowd pleasing. They've got all these elements that you find in action movies and comedies. Like the audience loves it, right? But they're serious films. You know, they're always getting nominated for Oscars or winning Oscars, and not that I care about the Oscars, but just as an example, I mean, even other awards, you know, Cannes and Venice and things like that. He gets that recognition, yeah, for
right,
making
like he's
proper films. But they kind of, even like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's, you know, it's at the awards and everything. But yet there's scenes in there, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio's got his flamethrower, and there's that movie element to them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So he is the go-to example for a guy who blends the two. And it is now that we're talking about him, it is a shame that he never made a comic book movie, because he's a huge comic book fan.
He kind of, from what I've heard, he kind of looks down upon them.
On the movies, you mean? Yeah.
The closest thing, and the closest thing, like, I don't think he ever would. To me, Tarantino's comic book film is the Django Unchained. And to me, my favorite of his films is the Django Unchained. So it's funny because I think, one, he is well regarded with general audiences and with critics. So he kind of has a place with both. I think either he himself said it or someone said it about him, or it was written about him, that he's kind of like the DJ of film. Like, he mixes so many different elements through his development that causes him to create these products that are kind of like a mixed balance, like you say. But there are, I don't know if there's as good and a clean an example as him, but I think there's other guys that do similar things. Most of them are the good directors. Like, I think at a certain level, Cameron can do that, especially with some of his earlier work. I think at a certain level, Paul Thomas Anderson can do that.
Yeah, that's right.
He was the one that did Boogie Nights, right? If I'm not mistaken, and There Will Be Blood and all those types of films. So I think there's other guys like him. Some of those are the names. He's probably the most consistent example of it, and the cleanest example of it. But there are a couple guys that they strike the balance between character focus and performances and visual cinematic storytelling, right? Like that kind of thing where
you can,
because you can tell the difference, right? Like, you can watch a film where it's a strong performance and it lacks that visual storytelling, and you're like, man, I really wish this had that visual element. And then you can see a film that has all the visual element in the world but lacks the performances, and you're like, man, I really wish this had the performances. And then you see those guys that can do both, and you're like, wow, this is great. Like, this is both. Like,
that's yeah.
You know,
I mean, that's the dream, right? When you're
one of those guys
trying to make a film, it's how you get everything just, you know, on point. And I mean, like, I've heard, you know, Quentin say that the key to getting his films to work is the casting. He's like, he's very particular with it, because he says that if you get it right, it's half the job is done for you, right? You can focus on the other aspects. You don't need to give that much direction to the actors, because you're letting them do what they do. Interesting point as well. I believe he's on record saying that his favorite superhero movie is oh God, what's it called? Bruce Willis, M. Night Shyamalan. Unbreakable, yeah.
Oh, Unbreakable, yeah. Yeah. He says that's
which is favorite. Interesting.
Which is the weirdest thing. It's the weirdest thing, and this is the reason why is we talk about directors and sensibility, right? Or at least I talk about the sensibility that I'd like to see in a comic book film. Tarantino's sensibility would inherently work in a comic book adaptation. Like, he wouldn't need to do anything different in a comic book per se. And I already think the Django Unchained, it starts as a Western, and I think towards the end he makes it like an action-adventure, mythological comic book type of thing, because he's trying to go from like slave to cowboy or Western adventurer to superhero within his world, right?
Yeah,
Like fastest gun in the East or whatever it is, and you know, these slaves are looking up to him as this like superhero type of action hero type of character. So he kind of in the third act of the Django Unchained goes into that territory, and I thought it worked really well. And that's what's the shame of it, is that he's one of those directors that has the sensibility to make a good comic book adaptation if he would make one, but he wouldn't make one because he's not interested. But it's like, but you would be perfect for.
I think he's not interested
any one of them,
because
really.
they only started making them, you know, like in a big way, when he was older, and because when they first started churning them out, a lot of them weren't that good. You know, you had the Ben Affleck Daredevil and the Nick Cage Ghost Rider and stuff like that, and the Fantastic Four, and that is what put him off. Because if you look at especially his early work, this
he classifies them a certain way based
if you
on
look at
what
his
he's
early
seen
work,
from
there's
the
very
genre,
strong hints that he's a comic book fan. So like in Reservoir Dogs, there's a whole thing where they're talking about the Thing from the Fantastic Four, and they even call the Invisible Woman the Invisibitch, something like that. Right? In True Romance, which he wrote just before he made Reservoir Dogs, the main character is a comic book fanatic. He works in a comic book shop. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And Quentin wrote it
in a comic book shop.
The character's kind of like based on him, like a fantasy version of him. And obviously he worked in a video shop, but he would have loved to work in a comic book shop. And you've got that character talking to the girl about, you know, the different comic books and everything. This was basically something that ran through his movies, always in the background. And there's even he did rewrites on, you know, some of them are uncredited, and you can hear his dialogue in those scenes. And one of them that comes to mind is I'm trying to think of the name of it. It was no, because that was a script that he flat out wrote. I mean, you can see the similarities with that and True Romance, which are also very similar to his very, very first movie, that My Best Friend's Birthday, which only half of it exists. That's based, you know, an amateur film.
I've it's really weird. I've seen it, and when I was watching it, I was like, how did this guy who made this film? I know it's his first film, but I'm like, how did he go from this to Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction? Like, he jumped another level. Like, his first film was one way.
Well,
and then he
what happened was he had never
went into his
made a movie before, right? So there was a lot of learning on that film. And he said making that film was his film school. You know, he learned so much from that. And, you know, honestly, I don't think it's a failure, even though only like half of it exists. It's still interesting to see his dialogue and his sensibilities. I mean, at one point there's a kung fu fight, you know, done in like the 1970s.
Yeah, and it's shot.
Right.
It's shot in a very you know, low budget type of way. But
what happened,
his learning curve was so quick. Like, he from that film to his next, he completely jumped.
He basically met a bunch of
Oh, he went to Sundance too. He was
exactly,
working on Reservoir Dogs with
he met
Terry
Harvey
Gilliam
Keitel, who helped fund the movie and cast Steve Buscemi and these other guys. And he went to Sundance, and it was Terry who helped him. You know, really, like, I've heard Terry talk about it, and he was saying they were doing these workshops. You can actually see these online,
right. And it's one of the things he told him was, you know how you said he learned a lot from that first film? Well, after that, when he was doing Reservoir Dogs, he was at Sundance, and one of his mentors happened to be Terry Gilliam for that year. And he asked him, and it's funny that we look at it now because he asked him, "Hey, Terry Gilliam, your movies are great and they're very visual and they're very this and they're very that. How do you get it from your head to where it's good on the screen and it doesn't suck?" Because everybody wants to be a good director, but not everybody is. And it's interesting he was asking him that because the first movie he did do, it wasn't that great. It wasn't like the Tarantino that you know now. And Terry Gilliam told him, well, Quentin, you don't need to do these things. You don't need to do the visual and the makeup and the acting and this. You have people that are doing that for you. You just have to communicate what you want. And he was like, oh, I can communicate what I want. And I think that was the birthplace of, like you said, where now he says, well, I just cast the right actors. And as long as I do that, half the job is done.
It did.
I think that came from Terry Gilliam because I think that's the adjustment that he made from his first film to his second. And that's why it worked so much because I think he realized, I think with his first one, he was trying to do everything himself. He was probably getting involved with actors too much. He didn't have probably great actors to work with. So I think in the second one, he took a step back and he said, no, I'm just going to tell you what I want. I'm just going to show you my character and then you do that work and I'm going to do these other things. And that was the adjustment. Like he made that adjustment. He took it off his
exactly
plate
what it
and
was.
he put it
And I was
onto
going to say, you can see all of this stuff online because it was on like the Blu-rays and whatnot. So at Sundance, he was with Terry and Steve Buscemi. They were filming scenes from Reservoir Dogs, right? Just for like practice, and you can see Terry guiding him, and you can hear him talking about it. And one of the things a lot of people don't realize what a director actually does is there's this mythology, right? And you're always seeing these behind the scenes shots where the director's behind the camera and you're like that's the cinematographer's job. That's literally a promotional shot, but because of that they've created this kind of mythology of what the director does, when in actuality all the director needs to do is but they need to understand just a little bit of how everyone does their job so they can communicate with everyone. I mean, in theory, if a director knew everyone's job inside out and they could communicate perfectly, they're like the ultimate director, right? Because they can get everyone to do exactly what they want. But essentially, like if you understand what cinematographer does to a small degree, you can communicate your ideas to them and let them do their job, and all that. So it's I mean, the job description literally is in the title. Your job is to direct people.
And that's probably why Tarantino reaches such a good balance.
True.
He talks a mile a minute. The guy's always talking, so he's a communicator for sure. He's not like the director that's sitting there quietly and you don't know what he's thinking. He's letting you know what he's thinking. But it's I guess that's what it is. I guess he just steps out of the way and he lets each department do what they do, and then he puts everything together or orchestrate. It's like the conductor at a symphony, right? The conductor at a symphony knows every part. He tells every part, it's your turn, it's your turn, it's your turn. But he's not really involved in their playing, right? Like he's not involved in their instrument. He's just pointing to them and like, okay, it's your time to go, and kind of organizing.
That's exactly what it is. But I just remembered what the film was that I was thinking about. It was Crimson Tide. So Tarantino did a
Crimson Tide.
No,
that was
Tony Scott,
who directed it?
who was one of.
No.
That's right.
That was with Denzel Washington and
Gene
what's
Hackman,
his name? What's the other guy's name from The Conversation?
Yeah. So
Gene Hackman. Yeah.
Yeah, he did a rewrite.
I
he was a
heard
big
he did
fan
the
of
dialogue
Tony
for that,
Scott,
and that's why
and
it was
then
so good.
you can hear it. Like there's a scene where they're arguing about who the best artist, I think it was, might be right, but I think it's the best artist for the Silver Surfer. And straight away when you hear it, you're like, yeah, Quentin wrote that. So it's just unfortunate that the timing didn't work out for him to want to do a superhero movie. I mean, the one he wanted to do, he said, was Luke Cage. He even said one of the things that put him off Luke Cage was the person he wanted to cast. I can't remember who it was, but basically he had a lot of people saying to him, no, you should cast this other guy. I know one of them, I think, was Lawrence Fishburne. I can't remember if that's who he wanted or who the others wanted, but basically there was this creative stumbling block straight out the gate. And
I believe
I can't remember who the other actor was though, but straight away there was this pushback just on casting the lead, and he didn't like that, and he was thinking, well, if this is what it's going to be like, I'd rather just make original films.
It's an interesting thing, and I want to get us back to Batman. So two more questions, and I'm gonna fuse Tarantino into it before we get to the last question. And it's since we're on Tarantino, if Tarantino got Batman, and let's say hypothetically he did it, good or bad, what would that look like?
I think it would be like a
because he's done Hateful Eight.
I think it'd be a wild
kind of
departure. Like, I think his Batman would kill.
But let's say it was a departure. Do you think it would be a good film?
Yeah, it would probably be a
maybe
good
not
film,
Batman adaptation,
but it would also work without being a Batman film. It could be an original movie, or it could have it could be a Green Hornet movie or something like that. And he's probably better suited to that, actually. It would just be wildly different from, I think, what most people would expect from Batman film. And I don't think he would do the ultra-realistic taxi driver type approach either. He does balance the whole movie and film thing, the plot and the character stuff. So
not his sensibility.
It would most likely be a good film, just a weird Batman film. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it would definitely be interesting. The sensibility, you're right, that he wouldn't be the best fit, but it would be interesting to see what he would do with it. Assuming he had full creative control. So, final question. It's an interesting one. Walk us through the opening scene of your Batman film. Why do you open it that way? And what characters are involved? Who's there? What does it look like? Actually, the opening, and then the ending scene, or how you know how some people think about how they would open a film and how they would end a film. Doesn't have to be the same film, but what's one possible opening of a Batman film in your version, and what's one possible ending of a Batman film in terms of the imagery, the characters, the type of scene that it would be? What would be that like closing image, that ending sequence and opening sequence that you would intrinsically have?
Okay, I'm just kind of thinking on the spot here. So the opening would probably be something along the lines of Bruce visiting the alley where his parents were murdered. And oh, did we get cut off? No, you're still there. Okay. Just dropped for a second. Yeah, he would visit the alley, leave flowers. He's obviously dressed very Bruce Wayne, very high class and all that. Looks super slick. And be this idea that he can't let go of that situation. Maybe it's a place that he visits every day, or maybe once a week or something, but often. And it's probably to hammer home the point that he has never been able to move on from that trauma. Like, that event is what shaped his life completely. Yeah, and I would do it in a very kind of solemn way. There's no one else around. No one even really seems to care that much about the Wayne's murder at this point, because, you know, several decades have passed. It's just like a regular alley. That kind of importance for him. Could also tie that into the character as well, with you know, he's resentful to Gotham, maybe the people of Gotham, that they moved on from his parents' murder, whereas for him it's, you know, the whole world stopped.
It's very interesting because it's very simple, but there's a gravitas to it, and it's like almost like an anchoring right away, or a grounding right away. And it's interesting. Nobody really, from the filmmakers that have done Batman, focuses in on it, or you know, it's the simplest of things, right? It's a very simple imagery, simple thing, but it tells you everything about the character, and it really anchors it in to the emotion and the psychology of the character. That you're right, he has not let go, even though the world has moved on. So it's a strong way to start. How would you end? What would
My
be your
ending? This literally just popped into my head while I was blabbering on. Back at the Batcave, he's completely, you know, beaten up, beaten down from what he's just experienced. He's on his own. He takes the cowl off, right? And you see bruises and cuts, and he's got that black paint around his eyes, like we said. And he sees his reflection. And he says to himself, I'm the Batman.
It's almost like a mirror image of your opening, in a way. You know, obviously both opening and closing, he's alone. One he's at the alley, one he's at the cave. You know, the origin point, what he's become, and there's a interestingness because you get the feeling when you describe the opening image, and I'm visualizing it in my head. You know, I picture a guy that's, like you said, very immaculately dressed, but beaten up, like there's some heaviness on his shoulders, right? Some grief and some gravity of something he's beaten up about psychologically that he can't let go of. And then your ending image is an interesting mirror of that, because, you know, like you said, he's in the suit, he takes off the cowl, he's beaten up, not maybe so immaculate. There's still that isolation and loneliness of it, but and the same heaviness on his shoulders and the same emotional and psychological burden, you know, just like the opening image. But the part where you end it, where he's telling himself or reminding himself psychologically that he's Batman, almost then pushes you into the next film, or gives you a sense of he will keep going. Like he's, you know, this is not going to end here, and he's not going to just give up and this and that, but he's going to psychologically re-push himself, maybe push himself too much and past points that he shouldn't be pushing himself past, but it gives you that sense of this is going to continue, and he's in a sense, more proactive psychologically as Batman with a forward thrust than he is as Bruce Wayne, where he's still stuck in the past, which is interesting. Or it gives you the symbolicness or the theme that.
Hello, you still there? Can't hear you. Okay, I'm back. I don't know what happened. I was still connected, but I couldn't hear you.
I don't know where that cut off, but what I was saying is it mirrors the image that you had at the beginning with the end.
Yeah, I caught all of that until, man, you were like really going deep into it.
I know. I think it's because everybody's locked inside and at home. Everybody's using the internet and their cell phones and computers, and I don't think the infrastructure was made for so many people to be using those things at the same time. So now, lately, at least in this last week, whether it's my computer, or whether it's the phone, or whether it's the internet for the cable, or whatever it is, the television, I've been noticing it drops more. Like it'll go out more because everybody's using this infrastructure that wasn't built for so many people.
I read an article about this the other day because what you're saying is exactly correct, and they were trying to give you like tips and stuff, and one of them was if you're trying to do a Skype call or something like that, like don't have anyone else use the microwave while you're doing it because it interferes with the signal.
Yeah. That's true. A lot of times I'm listening to a podcast and I'm using the microwave, and every time I step near it, it interferes with my earphones and my phone, and it just drops, probably because of the radio waves or whatever it is. But to get back to it, I don't know where it cut off, but I'm just going to start with the last point, which is he's beaten up in both images. He's emotionally drained in both images, but where you thematically get the sense, in contrast from the two images, of his Bruce Wayne will always be stuck in the past and will always be in this bubble and this incubation that never really forward thrusts or progresses. In your Batman scene where he's ending, in the end scene, he has a forward thrust, and you get the sense of this is always what it's going to be. He's always going to be forward thrusting as Batman, emotionally, psychologically, and physically, and on that journey of Batman's journey, whereas his Bruce Wayne will always be visiting the grave and will always be stuck, and he's never going to progress or forward thrust with a life as Bruce Wayne. That's always going to be just a bubble that's always going to be there, and it's always going to be the Batman that has life, or that becomes a life that progresses. But the funny thing is that even though that Batman has a forward thrust, and that bubble, that circle is bigger, it's still its own bubble, and it's still its own circle, and it's still like a never-ending war. So it's almost like you imagine, Bruce Wayne as a bubble, more like, like a circular pond that never goes anywhere. And then you imagine the Batman bubble like a satellite orbiting around the Earth. It's a bigger circle, and it's moving, and it has forward thrust, but it's still a circle.
Exactly,
It's still a never-ending bubble. So it's a very interesting contrast of the two images and how they're similar and how they're different, and what that could mean metaphorically for the character,
Yeah. I like everything you just said is like probably way more than I thought about, but it's really great. It sells it much better than I could. But I was thinking about the idea that traditionally with like Tim Burton and with Chris Nolan, he says, I'm Batman in the first action sequence when he's dressed up in the suit to just a random, goon or whatever, right? And in this, I was thinking, he has no need to say that to anyone because it's realistic. He wouldn't. Plus, that's what everyone else calls him, the Batman, right? And he accepts that as that's who he actually is, but also taking off the cowl, because it's like we say, he doesn't need to put the mask on to become Batman. That's who he is, right? So he's just looking at the reflection of his regular face without the mask and owning it. So that's where that idea came from, even though, I did just think of it on the spot. But yeah.
And it's very ritualistic, psychologically. It's like a self-affirmation. He's I don't want to say hypnotizing, but he's psychologically instilling that belief in himself.
Exactly,
repetitively, which then makes it stronger and stronger. Yeah. So it's a very interesting image and a very interesting take, because again, I still think the approach you're describing in your opening scene and your ending scene, I mean, you talk about ultra realism. I can feel the emotion and the psychology of it, and it's funny because you mentioned films like Taxi Driver, and you mentioned films like Joker, and you mentioned films that take that approach. But when you described your opening scene and your ending scene, because initially you were describing the approach, but I couldn't get a specific visualization of what you would execute it as, right? What it would look like in execution. So I didn't have the full sensibility. But now that you described like an opening scene and an ending scene, and I'm sure there's way more in the story that goes on, but this is just 2 scenes or sequences to get an idea. It really fleshes out the sensibility of your approach, in that I could see it. I could see the emotion of it. I could see the psychology of it. I could see how it's like the Joker or Taxi Driver. I could see the benefit of approaching it that way, and the strength of approaching it that way, because automatically it presents to me a Bruce Wayne and a Batman that is much more intimidating. And someone's going to say, well, how's it intimidating if it's just the scene of him going to the grave of his parents? Or how's it intimidating if it's just him looking in the mirror and saying he's Batman and being all beaten up? What's so intimidating about that? And I think what's so intimidating about that is the gravitas and the heaviness of the emotion and the psychology of what you're portraying makes it intimidating. Because this is like, I don't know how to phrase it. This is a serious dude. This is like someone that's dealing with some heavy things, and that's intimidating because he's going to have some psychic elements of, do you ever meet someone just in random that's a very strong personality? And I don't mean strong personality that they're extroverted, but strong personality in that they've been through some horrific things and they're very intense, like a very intense personality. Sometimes that person doesn't even have to say anything. You could see them and you could feel them, and you could say, wow, this guy's a serious dude. And it's a little bit intimidating because there's some danger here. There's some heaviness here, that it's some real intensity of some serious stuff.
100%.
And that's the vibe that I feel from those sequences. It gives you that sense.
I've met guys like that, like what you just described, and just thinking about it now, all of them do actually have one thing in common, which is, regardless of height, physically, they're also scary guys. They're bulky, big bulky dudes, and you can just tell. You can tell, yeah.
Yeah, you can. It's not just the physicalness, because I've seen people that are physically fit, but you don't feel that.
I know. Like I said before, I know bodybuilders who haven't really been through much in their life feel any intimidation being around them, no matter how big or strong they are or anything like that. It's these other guys who there's a I want to use the word scariness. There's a scariness to them from just being around them. Like, you don't know what to expect.
It's the unhingedness.
Yeah.
It's the psychic aspect, right? That psychotic element where you can sense it. And I'll never forget. When I'm taking the elevator to my apartment, I met 2 people one time that gave me such a strong impression. One of them was like a real life Superman, right? So I'm in the elevator with this guy, and I'm like, my God, this is like a farm boy from Kansas that is giving a real Superman vibe. Like I got the sense, like a real Boy Scout,
Right, yeah.
right? Like physically, he was built like Superman, and he looked like a farm boy, and he was like the perfect type casting wise. But his energy was like, wow, this is a Boy Scout. This is a good guy. Like this is like a Superman good guy,
Yeah.
right? And I'll never forget that impression because it was a very strong impression. And then there was another time where I got in the elevator and there was a guy, and the impression was, holy shit, this guy's a killer. Like there's an unhingedness. There's such a psychic, aggressive heaviness in his presence that this is a dangerous dude. And he looked like a dangerous dude. He wasn't the most physically imposing guy, but he was the most psychically, I don't want to say psychotic, but in terms of people that I've met in my life, the most psychotic guy that I've met, where the energy was tangible and it was scary because it was like, this dude is unhinged, and I don't know the backstory. I don't know where he's coming from right now. I could see, what he's projecting and what he's showing visually, but this is a dude that something's going on. Like there's something going on.
Yeah, it's the aura that they have, and
it's
a lot of the guys that I've met like that I've generally, one of the things that they all have in common is they've been in jail.
Yeah,
right.
That was one of the impressions.
And there's obviously, I mean, look, I've met people that have done 30 days or whatever in like a holiday camp type jail, and that hasn't done anything to them, right? You wouldn't know.
Yeah.
But these guys obviously have done serious time in like a proper jail. They're hardened. It's probably one of the reasons as well. They're like,
it's a
built,
defense mechanism, right?
But you can just, like I said, they're generally scary individuals, and you don't know what to expect, and you don't need to be told, like, watch yourself around this person. You can feel it.
You feel it. It's like I think human beings have a self-defense mechanism where like a flight or fight response, or you have like a sixth sense, as they say, where it's tangible in the air and your alerts go off. And I don't know if this is where the spider sense came from when they created Spider-Man, but sometimes you get that feeling of a sixth sense where you just know psychically, like, I'm picking something up here. Like this is like all your senses giving you like a heads up.
Yeah, that's a real thing. Not necessarily that it's psychic, but it's like a sixth sense, to alert yourself to possible danger, like a spider sense.
Yeah. Well, Prodigy, Andy Prodigy, I want to thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
This is going to be a little bit of an edit because I think it's between, because the thing as it's recording, it's showing the time that's going by, and altogether, this is probably, once I'm done editing it, it's an editing. I just mean I'm going to cut out the parts where it dropped off, and add images and things like that. But it's going to be a 3-hour plus edit. So I got some time. I work from I work from home nowadays, so I definitely have all the time in the world to edit this thing. I'm going to start tonight, but it's going to be a long video. When it does go up, it's going to be a 3-hour plus probably video from what I could gather. But it's been interesting, and I think we went to some interesting places, and it really goes to show what could be done with a Batman character or a Batman film from a cinema fan's perspective, that really they're not anywhere close to hitting. I mean, like the two sequences that you described, maybe you'll see something like that in The Godfather. Maybe you'll see something like that with Goodfellas, or, films or cinema as we know it. Maybe you'll see something in Taxi Driver. But when it comes to comic book films, there's still a bias, I think, and an impression when those are adapted or when they're tackled that prevents them from being approached as a film or as a cinema. And even when they say it is, like when they were praising Christopher Nolan and saying The Dark Knight is a film, and Dark Knight Rises is a film, and Nolan approaches it, from a high cinematic approach, and he's elevating the material. It still shows a bias and a disregard and a disrespect, because that wasn't really at that level. Like, they look at it like, well, he was a step above, and they're pushing it even further than what it is, but he's not a Godfather. He's not, a Kubrick. He's not. It's still not that level. But from the talk that we've had, and even just talking about two sequences, the Batman character is something that could be that level if it was approached in that way, or you had a filmmaker that was handling it in that way. And it's a shame because everybody keeps mentioning his name, and everybody keeps talking about Aronofsky when it comes to this project or that project or this one or that one. And he's like completely the dude that would take it to that level. And like you said, for whatever reason, he's been involved in a lot of different things, and they always fall apart. And it's the strangest thing of why they fall apart, but I bet you it has something to do with the clashing with his creative vision and trying to reach a general mass audience, and producers being what producers are. I think that's always what ends up being the issue. But hey, hopefully one day he becomes so successful that he can greenlight what he wants, how he wants, and it's not an issue. But it's the funniest thing that he's like the perfect guy, and it always falls apart.
Yeah. I think he's moved away from that stuff now in terms of his interests. I hope he does go back, but I think because it's happened so many times, and he was the most interesting filmmaker of his generation. I think he's taken his foot off the gas a bit. I did like his last film, but it was very different. Yeah. And with him, it's I don't even think it's a case of clashing creatively. I mean, there is that as well, where they'll look at his stuff and be like, this is not going to work with purpose like this or whatever. But I think ultimately, this is something that Jodorowsky had said, or someone had said about him when he was trying to make that Dune movie back in the 70s that never happened, which is they were scared of his imagination. It's
Really? In what sense?
that they were happy to throw money at the project in development, and they were very excited to see how it was progressing, what he had. But as it was getting closer and closer to becoming a reality, the fact that, it's different. If you're a studio and you've put in, $5-10 million in pre-production development, that's not that bad. That happens all the time, and they take a loss on that, right? When you get to the point where you have to commit and put down $200 million, $100 million, and that's without your marketing costs, that's where it becomes like you're in a casino, essentially. And do you want to play your hand or do you want to fold? And that's where they get scared. And they think this is it's not going to be accepted by the mass audience, or they're not sure if it's going to be accepted, and they don't want to risk it. They wouldn't, like with Aronofsky, they wouldn't have developed it if they didn't like what they were seeing to some degree, right? Because at that time, he didn't have like a crazy reputation or anything. He did Requiem for a Dream, and I think that was like his big thing. But he was like Nolan. He was this, he'd done Memento. They were both these young filmmakers who hadn't done like a big movie before. So they're taking a gamble. But they ended up going with Nolan anyway. So they were going to do that. But I think Nolan was the safer choice. Probably what he pitched to them for Batman. And yeah, it's a thing where. Because it's like we were talking about before. Sometimes I don't think producers and executives get enough credit for reining people in and things like that. And ultimately, you touched on this in that big video series you did. Because it's a business, they can't plow money into something that is not going to make a profit. it just doesn't make any sense, right? Like
Right.
the vision that you laid out for this Batman movie, where they're using all of the James Cameron type Avatar tech, and it's, you know, it's crazy amounts of CG, and it looks like a comic book.
What it is. You hit it on the mark exactly, and this is what it is you need a producer, right? And there are these producers. You don't see too many of them, but they have existed in cinema history, and you've seen them before. And I'm going to name one of them specifically. You need a producer that wants to make money, but it's not just about money. He's as creatively motivated as the director. And there are producers like that where they're interested in stories, and they're interested in vision, and they're interested in, I want to make a mark, and I want to innovate, and I want to make money, but I want to also achieve creatively. And the perfect example of that, and the perfect director that has benefited from partnering with a director like that is, and it's funny because you mentioned the Avatar tech, James Cameron's producing partner, John Lando, I think his name is Lando. Lando, he's one of those guys. He's one of those guys, especially with Cameron, that continuously has said, you know, they produced Titanic. Man, this is going to go way over budget. I don't know these creative choices that you're doing, and he still did it. And let Cameron go where he may. I don't know if they did Terminator together, but I know they did Avatar together. Same thing. Man, this is becoming too expensive. You're really creatively pushing. Again, he went the full distance with Cameron, and he let Cameron do what he did. And now Cameron's off making 3-4 Avatar films, and Ledoux again is pouring money into that. And he's still like, oh wow, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of films, but he's still doing it. He's one of those producers, and I think people give Cameron a lot of credit, but he's really lucky to have a producing partner like that. It was similar with before the big thing. I think Tarantino's main producing partner was Harvey Weinstein, right? And it was a similar relationship where Weinstein would kind of back Tarantino and let him go where he wants to go. So those directors, Tarantino, who had that type of partnership, and then especially Cameron, because he tends to make more expensive films. Cameron with Ledoux, who has that partnership, is very lucky, because if Aronofsky had a producing partner like Ledoux, which Cameron has, he would have an easier time, like Cameron, to make these type of bigger passion projects, because Cameron's making films at $200 to $300 million, if not more, that are passion projects, and he's doing it because his producing partner is creatively motivated as well as financially motivated, so he's letting him go there. You know, it's almost like, we have a good track record, so I'll do that with you. I'll take that risk. But a lot of producing partners don't, and I think Aronofsky lacks a producing partner like that, where Cameron has a producing partner like that. And it's a shame, because I think, although Cameron pushes technology and he innovates, his stories aren't too complicated and his visions are good, but he's not the most extreme director when it comes to that. Aronofsky's a little bit more deep. He's a little bit of a deeper imprint when it comes to his signature as a director, that I think if he had a producing partner like what Cameron has with Ledoux, he would be one of the most influential directors. I mean, he already is one of the most influential directors of his generation, but I think he would be even more influential when it comes to the history of directors in cinema, in that he would really be able to push, you know, to God knows which directions. You know, he would have all the ability to solidify himself and his vision. And it's a shame that he hasn't had that yet. And so many people dropped out with him, because it would be easy to say that people could have dropped out on Tarantino and people could have dropped out on Cameron, because it was the same exact situation. But they had producing partners that didn't drop out on them, and I think at the time Harvey Weinstein was also creatively motivated as well as financially motivated. At least that was the impression of him as a producer, that they sort of backed their directors.
Yeah.
And Aronofsky just never had
That's
that.
true. Weinstein was, and his brother, but it's interesting because it was from a financial perspective. So because of Quentin and mainly Pulp Fiction, they realized, as their little studio was, they could make movies up to like a $10 million budget or thereabouts, which was considered very small even back then, right? And they could make off of those hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, which back then was huge. Obviously now it's changed. It's like movies, go into the billions and in terms of money they generate. But so the Weinsteins looked at it creatively. We want to make these smaller, character-driven type films, and they were involved, but it was always to do with keeping the budgets low. It's interesting because it's like, everything was designed around budget. It was like, we have to make something that comes in at this small amount, but it has to be able to maximize our profits, and not just a bit. We don't want to spend 10 million and make back 30. We want to make back 150. And that's what made them very successful. But so it's just interesting because it's ultimately financial business, but it tied into them being motivated creatively. But you are right in that's what you want, ideally. You want these people to respect the creativity, even though ultimately it is a business and they're there to make a profit. Because it's like we were saying, this kind of Batman movie that you had visualized, this very fantastical one. I was listening to you like pitch it, and I was thinking, Jesus, this thing would cost like $500 million.
Oh, it would be. It's the thing about it is, I talked about taking character-driven performances and roles in that narrow focus and putting them into a fantasy world, and it's like how I imagine it. Now that I think about it and we've talked about it and we went into the business side of it, it would never be possible unless there was a producing partner like what Cameron has. But when you think about it, Titanic and Avatar and most of Cameron's films would never be possible if he didn't have the producing partner that he has. So
True.
It's that type of thing where you need a creative / financially motivated producer, because the scope, the scale of it is so big. Obviously, it wouldn't be CGI heavy like Avatar. I mean, there would be CGI in it, but I would focus on martial arts, so it wouldn't be like. Actually, no, it would be CGI.
I was going to say it would have to be the way you described it. Even Batman on screen couldn't be like what you described. Couldn't just be an actor. One actor giving a performance. You would need the big bodybuilder guy doing the physical performance. You would need a proper actor doing the facial and the voice and stuff.
Yeah, and there's another element to it, which is, I talked about I had asked a what if situation with Robin, and I had also asked a what if situation with Batman. And it drastically changed the character. And that's why I had to correct myself. At first, I thought there would be no CGI, but there would be a lot of CGI, because what ended up happening is while I was writing my Batman script, and it was the first of a 6-story plot, I was driving out of a gas station. And as I was driving out of the gas station, there was an ex-military vet, paraplegic in a wheelchair. And the traffic was so that I was pulled in between the sidewalk. I was on the sidewalk before you get onto the street, and I couldn't move. So I was blocking his path. So, I didn't see the guy. So the way that I first saw him is he punched on my driver side window. And when he punched on it, he didn't shatter the window, but it was so strong that it jarred me. And then I looked, and it was this paraplegic ex-military, very angry, that the sidewalk was being blocked, and I couldn't move, so he had to go around, and he was very pissed off about it. And at the time, I was writing the Batman script, and that bled its way, I guess, in my subconscious into the script. And over the course of writing the script, during one of the action sequences, my Batman ended up losing his arm. And at first I was like, this is interesting. Where do we go from here? And what ended up happening is I had Lucius Fox create a biotechnology, what's the word? Not amputee, but like a limb, like an arm, an arm replacement. But I tied it into his neurology and his synapses. So the arm is, I don't want to say symbiote, but it's based off biotech, where it could change based off his thoughts. So I made where the arm could go into itself, and he would be an amputee as Bruce Wayne. And as Batman, the arm would come out, and he would have a fully malleable, changeable, hardened adamantium, whatever material type of arm, where he could change it to his thoughts. And as that developed, I needed him to go up against fantastical characters like Clayface and a really super large Bane and Mr. Freeze. And it was becoming, this needs to become more escalated. So then a paradigm developed where every film out of 6 films or 5 or 6 films, he loses another limb. And you do it in a different way each time. And after the first or second time, the audience starts to expect it. So then you start to play around with, okay, you're expecting him to lose another limb. So now I have to be more creative about how it happens, right? Or fake you out until it happens, right? And it ended up becoming that the Batman, he went from human being to a mind inside of a body. I don't want to say ghost in the shell, but Batman's mind inside of a fully, like, he literally lost his body to this war on crime, and now he has a biotechnological body in his brain. But it also made it interesting because I was like, this Batman could stand up to Superman. Like, this Batman in the Justice League could literally take anybody out. And it made the fighting more dynamic because his limbs could shift and change and become any shape that he imagines. So now he doesn't need a cape because that comes out and it forms through his mind, right? And something like that, to get back to your point,
of course,
would require an insane budget, a huge budget. So at first I was like, no, it doesn't take a big budget at all. But then once I remembered, like, wait a minute, eventually the story goes to this place. Now we are talking about like Avatar type of CGI and Avatar type of technology and a fully, like, based off the animated series type of Clayface, right? It went to that place, but it goes to show that there's so many ways you can approach the character, whether it's ultra fantastical or ultra realistic. But I think the best thing is whichever way you're going to approach it, you better go 100% in that direction for it to be a strength, right? For it to work. Because if you try and half-ass it and you do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of everything, you don't really have a take. Like, what's your take? Like, you have a fantasy take or a realistic take or an ultra realistic take or an ultra fantastical take, but if you're doing both because you're trying to please everybody, you don't have a take. Like, you have to be divisive, or you have to be willing to be divisive, like push people away for it to really be artistic. And it makes it riskier, but that's just the nature of the creativity.
You just nailed it. That's the thing. Like, when you try and please all the different demographics, which is what they try and do now, forever, obviously, you dilute the vision. It's just the way it is. It's like a math equation. But that's the idea, right? It's you need to maximize profits, which sucks. But like the thing is,
it does.
What you've described is basically the Batman that you want to see, that you laid out, is a more sophisticated version of Alita Battle Angel on steroids, basically, right?
It's essentially it takes a lot from science fiction and anime, and it's especially science fiction with the dichotomy of the themes of technology and humanity. And here's a guy that starts as a man that wants to be more than a man, and then ultimately he becomes a mind inside of a machine, and he is more than a man. But also the lack of humanity and how he loses the humanity and the pain of it, and he's being ripped apart limb by limb, right? So it's it goes to some very dark places. Like when you talk about psychology, it goes to some very dark places, and it goes to some very fantastical places in terms of the heights of what's possible. But that's why I like the Alita Battle Angel so much, because what I'm describing, I have not really seen done outside of anime itself, right? Like you can see that type of stuff. Like what I'm describing, you see a lot in anime and science fiction. It's all over the place, right? Stories like that. But when it comes to film, the closest thing is maybe 1 or 2 or 3 science fiction films that are out there, or Alita Battle Angel. But this is a little bit different because Alita Battle Angel doesn't really go to the dark places that Batman could go. Like it's a little bit more psychologically driven.
Came to mind for me with everything you just said was the original RoboCop, which is one of my favorite films.
The tone, the original RoboCop, that's very much the type of tone. That's very much, it's a very gritty sci-fi type of dark commentary on society type of thing, which is what science fiction and anime usually do. But that RoboCop film, I think you don't see films like that, and that's a very good film.
Also just reminded me that the ending is similar to the ending that I said for what my Batman take would be, where I just thought about it because he's removed his mask in that end sequence, and the boss of the company asks him what his name is, and he says Murphy.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I remember.
It's the
yeah. I remember in the police station.
I mean, it has like a similarity. That's all. It's a great movie. I think we've pretty much covered everything and then some.
Yeah, we've gone to some other interesting areas as well. But yeah, it's been a great conversation. I think we just hit the 3 hour and 40 mark, so this might be a 4-hour video. But hey, I mean, it was interesting, and we covered a lot of ground. When we talk about these films and we talk about these approaches, and it's a very interesting call because we're at the opposite end of the spectrum. So it's a conversation that shows you can go in both directions and have it be very effective. But it's also interesting because it shows that the films that we are getting, I mean, I don't know the Matt Reeves version, but I'm assuming it's going to be similar to what we've seen before, and that it's not drastically going to depart from what these movies usually are. I mean, I would be shocked if it did. But really, these films can be much more innovative in different directions than what we've been seeing. Like, I mean, for God's sakes, a RoboCop is more innovative and artistic in what it achieves than what we're seeing nowadays. And the characters aren't that different. Like, when you get down to it, the character of Batman himself is not that different than some of the things you see in anime or some of the things that you see in science fiction or you see in film. It's just that filmmakers haven't approached it that way. They've approached it as, I'm adapting a comic book, instead of I'm adapting a character and maybe I want to change the direction of what this story is in some kind of way. I mean, I guess Aronofsky was the closest thing, but never came to fruition.
Sucks.
It does suck, yeah. But Prodigy, thank you so much for the time and joining me on this call. And I will get this video out and up as soon as possible.
I look forward to it.
All righty.
Take care.
Yeah, talk soon.
Bye.